The story begins with the school building standing tall, like an old giant with faded red brick walls, watching Emma as she approached. Ridgeview High was her new school, a strange and unfamiliar place after her family had suddenly moved to this town. Inside, long hallways stretched in every direction. It looked like a normal middle school with students hurrying around, the sound of footsteps echoing, and a faint smell of cleaning soap in the air. But something about the place felt unusual. Emma couldn't explain it, but she knew it wasn't just her imagination. After a short tour from a senior student who didn't seem very friendly, Emma found herself at the end of a quiet hallway. The row of lockers here looked older than the rest, with rusty hinges and a few doors bent out of shape. The silence made this part of the school feel different, almost like it was holding a secret. At that moment, Emma couldn't help but wonder what she might discover. Soon after, Emma's eyes stopped on locker number 13. Unlike the others, this locker looked like it belonged to another time. Its color was dull, with scratches across its surface, as if something strange had clawed at it. The senior student who had guided her didn't say a word. Without any expression, the student handed Emma a key and walked away, leaving her alone. Emma sighed and turned the key to open the locker. The hinges squeaked loudly, like they hadn't moved in years. When the door swung open, a musty smell rushed out. Inside, there wasn't much to see. It's just dust, a few rusty paper clips, and a small book. The book looked very old. Its cover was almost torn apart, and the pages were yellowed with age. Then Emma picked it up carefully, her fingers brushing the rough, cold paper. On the first page, written in faded black ink, were the words saying Laura, 2008. They are always watching you. There, Emma's heart started beating faster. The name felt familiar, but she couldn't remember where she had heard it before. Trying to shake off the strange feeling, she slipped the book into her bag and closed the locker. But as she walked away, the sound of the locker door shutting on its own made her freeze. Soon after, she turned around. Locker 13 was now tightly closed, even more securely than before. The hallway was empty, with no one in sight. All she could hear were the fading footsteps of other students in the distance. All day, Emma couldn't stop thinking about that locker. Something about it felt wrong. From bits of conversation she overheard from other students, she learned that the locker hadn't been used in a long time. There were whispers, old stories about a girl named Laura who had disappeared years ago. They said Laura was found unconscious near that very locker, and just a few days later, she vanished without a trace. The teachers never talked about the incident. Some students even said they avoided the topic on purpose. But the story lived on, passed down from one group of students to the next, making locker number 13 a thing everyone stayed away from. Now, that locker belonged to Emma, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the quietness in that hallway was more than just an accident. Emma's first day at Ridgeview High felt long, but her thoughts never strayed far from locker number 13. That night, as she sat in her room, the small book from the locker lay on her desk. The soft glow of her desk lamp lit up the faded words on the cover, saying Laura, 2008. Her curiosity got the better of her. She carefully opened the book, making sure not to tear its fragile pages. Inside, Laura's notes felt like glimpses of someone trying to navigate a tough and overwhelming world. Emma couldn't help but wonder what kind of story the book was about to tell. The first pages of the book seemed normal. Laura wrote about her friends, schoolwork, and how she didn't like some of her teachers. But as Emma kept reading, the words began to change. They felt strange and scary. Laura wrote about feeling like someone was always watching her. She said she couldn't sleep because she kept hearing noises. She mentioned seeing a shadow at the end of the hallway, But when she turned around, no one was there. Laura also wrote about the locker. She said it felt different from the others, like it was hiding something. She didn't know what, but she felt like she wasn't alone when she was near it. On one page, there was a messy drawing of a tall figure. It had blank, empty eyes and a blurry shape for a body. Underneath the drawing, Laura had written that the figure never went away. Emma felt uneasy, but she couldn't stop reading. The book seemed to pull her in deeper with every page. Then, Emma tried to set the book aside and focus on her schoolwork, but the strange feeling wouldn't leave her alone. The hallway where locker number 13 was felt colder than usual, as if there was a breeze, even though there was no wind. At lunchtime, Emma decided to go to the library. She wanted a quiet place to think, but as she walked past the lockers, she froze. The door of locker number 13 was slightly open. That couldn't be right cause she had locked it that morning. Emma's heart started to race as she carefully stepped closer. With each step, the door seemed to open a little wider, even though no one else was there. When she finally reached the locker, it was open enough for her to see inside. Sitting there was something new, and it's a rusty paper clip twisted into a perfect circle. It looked like some sort of strange symbol, but Emma didn't understand what it meant. Suddenly, a soft sound came from behind her. It wasn't a person's voice, but a whisper, low and unclear. The sound made her skin crawl, sending a shiver down her spine. At that time, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Then, Emma slammed the locker door shut and walked away, trying to convince herself that everything was just her imagination. But the harder she tried to forget, the more she felt like something was watching her from a distance. That night, in her room, Emma opened Laura's diary again, hoping to find answers. On the last written page, she found a sentence that felt like it was meant for her, saying, "If you find this, be careful. Don't let him into your mind." The next page was blank, but there were rough marks where something had been torn out. Emma felt a heavy weight in her chest. She knew this wasn't just a story anymore. Somehow, she was now a part of it. Outside her window, she heard footsteps on the path. But when she peeked out, the street was empty and no one was there. As the day goes by, locker number 13 quickly became the talk of Ridgeview High. Everyone had heard about Emma being assigned to it, and whispers filled the hallways. Students avoided walking near it, their eyes darting away nervously. But not everyone believed the stories. Max, a bold and popular student known for being daring and careless, thought the whole thing was silly. He loved making jokes about the locker and teasing anyone who seemed scared of it. One afternoon, Max decided to check it out for himself. He noticed the locker was unlocked, as Emma had left it open that morning. Curiosity took over, and he swung the door open. Inside, it looked ordinary and just a bit of dust and some scratches on the walls. Then Max stood in the empty hallway, staring at locker number 13. To him, it was nothing more than an old, dusty locker. He found the idea of it being cursed ridiculous and couldn't help but laugh. The sound of his laughter echoed through the quiet corridor, making the space feel even emptier. Feeling brave, Max pulled out a red marker from his pocket. Without hesitation, he leaned into the locker and scribbled a teasing message on the inside wall. He didn't believe in the stories and thought it was just a good joke. To Max, the so-called curse was nothing to take seriously. When Max finished writing and slammed the locker door shut, the sound was strange, heavier and sharper than usual. For a moment, he felt a chill run down his spine, but he quickly brushed it off, telling himself it was nothing, just his imagination. That night, something terrible happened. On his way home from a friend's house, Max decided to take a shortcut across the train tracks, a path he had used many times before. As he walked along the tracks, the sound of an approaching train grew louder. Strangely, Max didn't seem to hear it. Witnesses later said he looked confused, turning his head in the wrong direction, and he didn't move as the train sped toward him. The impact was instant, and Max lost his life that night. News of Max's death shocked Ridgeview High. Students who had heard about his jokes and the locker felt a shiver of fear. But not everyone connected the tragedy to the stories about locker number 13. Some refused to believe there was any link at all. Meanwhile, Vanessa, who was known as Max's best friend and girlfriend, reacted very differently from others. Instead of being scared by the rumors about locker number 13, she was angry. She hated how people were connecting Max's death to the locker. Some students tried to talk about the so-called curse near her, but Vanessa snapped, her voice sharp with frustration. She blamed Max's actions, not the locker, for what had happened. Losing Max left a huge emptiness in Vanessa's life. To cope with her sadness, she started spending her nights at city clubs, trying to escape the heavy pain she felt inside. Even though Vanessa never believed in curses or anything mystical, people around her began to notice a change. She spoke more harshly, acted recklessly, and seemed to challenge everything, as if daring fate to prove her wrong. One night, after leaving a club, Vanessa decided to take a quiet, lonely path home, something she usually didn't do. On that dark road, a stranger stopped her and pulled out a knife. What began as a robbery ended in tragedy. The next morning, news of Vanessa's death spread quickly. The students at Ridgeview High were now terrified. 2 deaths, just weeks apart, both connected to locker number 13. Emma couldn't believe it was just a coincidence. Each night, Laura's diary seemed to call out to her, as if it held secrets she needed to uncover. But whenever Emma tried to read it, she felt a strange sensation, like someone was watching her. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. In her dreams, she saw Max and Vanessa standing in the hallway by the lockers. Their eyes looked empty and filled with pain. Their shapes were blurry, like looking through fog glass. Both of them pointed toward locker number 13, as if they wanted Emma to find something hidden within. When Emma woke up, she felt certain about one thing, that the locker wasn't just an ordinary object. Something inside it felt alive, and it wanted more than just attention. The deaths of Max and Vanessa shook Ridgeview High to its core. The once lively hallways were now quiet, as if the school itself was mourning. Students, who had once whispered about locker number 13 as a silly ghost story, now spoke in hushed, fearful voices. Emma noticed the change every day. She couldn't escape the haunting images from her nightmares. Max and Vanessa's blank faces staring at her, and the icy feeling that grew stronger each time she walked past locker number 13. What puzzled Emma the most was how the teachers reacted to everything. Some looked worried, especially the younger ones who seemed to care deeply about the students. But one teacher stood out. On the other hand, Mr. Harrington, the school's oldest history teacher, seemed strangely calm. He had been teaching at Ridgeview High for almost 40 years. His neatly combed white hair and round glasses that always slipped down his nose gave him a grandfatherly appearance. Yet, his quiet demeanor made Emma wonder if he knew more than he was letting on. Whenever Max or Vanessa's names came up, Mr. Harrington's face stayed blank, showing no reaction. Even during the announcement of a memorial for the 2 students, he sat quietly at his desk, calmly writing in his old leather notebook as if nothing had happened. Emma couldn't stop thinking about how strange he seemed. One day, as she walked past the teacher's lounge, she overheard a conversation. The principal sounded worried, mentioning that the locker should have been locked. Mr. Harrington, however, spoke in a calm tone, saying anyone who messed with the locker would have to face the consequences. Emma felt a chill run through her. His words echoed in her mind, making her uneasy. It seemed like he knew something that others didn't, something about the locker and its strange history. The thought stayed with her, filling her mind with an uncomfortable feeling she couldn't shake. The next morning, things took an even stranger turn. When Emma reached her locker, she found it open. That was impossible, cause she always locked it before leaving school. But now, the door was slightly ajar, and inside was something new. A piece of old paper, torn from a notebook, sat there. It looked aged and fragile, as if it had been waiting for someone to find it. Emma knew this was no coincidence. The mystery was growing deeper, and she was right in the middle of it. On the paper, written in faded ink, were the words saying he is still here. He knows you see him. Emma felt her knees go weak. The handwriting looked familiar, just like Laura's writing in the diary. But she wondered how could that happen, cause she always kept the diary safe at home. Her uneasiness grew stronger, and Emma decided to return to the library to learn more about the school's history. In the dusty school archives, she found an old newspaper article about Laura's disappearance in 2008. The article included a small photo of Laura standing with a group of students in front of the locker hallway. Behind them was an older man with a faint smile. Emma's eyes locked onto his face. It was unmistakable, and it was Mr. Harrington. However, the article didn't provide many details. It only mentioned that Laura was last seen at school and was later found unconscious near locker number 13. After that, the case seemed to stop abruptly, as if no one wanted to look into it further. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story, and she was determined to find out. At night, Emma had another dream. This time, she saw Laura standing in a dark hallway, right in front of locker number 13. Laura's face was blurry, but her voice was clear and firm, saying he knows. He sees everything. You have to stop him before it's too late. Then, Emma woke up gasping for air, her heart racing. Her thoughts were jumbled, but one thing was becoming clear, that something about Mr. Harrington didn't feel right. Ever since what happened to Max and Vanessa, Emma hadn't felt completely safe at Ridgeview High. But lately, her fear wasn't just in her mind or in her nightmares. It felt like it was creeping into her real life. One day, during the last class of the day, Emma started to notice something strange. All day, she felt like someone was watching her, but whenever she turned around, no one was there. Even in class, she felt a piercing gaze from the corner of the room. When she looked toward the chalkboard, a faint shadow flickered across the glass window behind the teacher. The feeling was impossible to ignore, and Emma knew something was very wrong. When the bell rang, Emma quickly packed her things and decided to head home early. As she walked down the hallway near the teacher's lounge, she heard footsteps behind her. They were heavy and slow, as if someone was deliberately trying to make her feel uneasy. Emma sped up, but the footsteps kept following her. She turned around nervously, but the hallway was completely empty. As she passed by the lockers to grab something from her bag, Emma noticed that locker number 13 was slightly open again. This time, there was a new piece of paper inside. It looked older and dirtier than before. With trembling hands, she picked it up and read the message telling her to not run, cause he knows she's here. Suddenly, Emma heard footsteps getting closer. Without thinking, she slammed the locker door shut and ran out of the hallway as fast as she could. What she didn't see was the figure standing at the end of the hallway, watching her from the shadows. As Emma ran away, the figure stepped forward slowly. It was Mr. Harrington. His smile was faint, but his eyes were cold and chilling. Emma hurried to the school library, hoping it would feel safer with more people around. While flipping through old articles about Laura, she discovered something even stranger. There was an additional report from 2008. It mentioned an anonymous witness who claimed to have seen Laura often talking to a man at school. The report didn't give a name, but the description fit Mr. Harrington perfectly. Emma's fear grew stronger as she pieced the clues together. Emma's heart raced as she searched for more information, but before she could find anything helpful, a librarian approached her. The librarian told her it was closing time, and the library would soon be locked. As Emma stepped outside, the cold night air sent chills through her. She decided to take a shortcut through the school's garden to get home faster. But suddenly, she heard those heavy footsteps again. This time, the footsteps were louder and faster, as if whoever or whatever it was chasing her. Emma started running without looking back. She could feel the presence getting closer with every step. She didn't know if it was a person or something else entirely. When Emma finally reached the school gates, the footsteps stopped. She turned around, her chest heaving with fear, but the path behind her was empty. No one was there. Just as she was about to leave, Emma glanced up at the school building. In one of the windows, she saw a shadow. It was Mr. Harrington, standing still and staring at her without moving. Emma tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, but there was something in his gaze, something cold and unsettling, that told her she was not safe. Shortly after, Emma arrived home, breathing heavily. She rushed to her room and grabbed Laura's diary, hoping it would give her some answers. On the last page she had read, new words had appeared, and it's the words that hadn't been there before saying he has chosen Emma, just like he chose Laura. After reading that, Emma slammed the book shut and squeezed her eyes closed. But the cold chill spreading through her body told her that this wasn't over. Emma's unease grew stronger in the following week. Every night, she had nightmares about Laura and a dark shadow that seemed to watch her. But now, she was certain the shadow wasn't just in her dreams. For the past few days, Emma felt like someone was following her at school. A tall figure with round glasses kept appearing in places where no one should be. Whenever she passed by the teacher's lounge, she felt the cold stare of Mr. Harrington following her, as if he knew a secret no one else did. Then, Emma decided she couldn't ignore the mystery any longer. One quiet afternoon, she returned to the school library, determined to find out more about Laura. As she flipped through old documents, she found a report that mentioned Laura often talking to Mr. Harrington before she disappeared. Before Emma could read further, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning around quickly, she froze. Mr. Harrington stood by the library door, his calm face hiding something dark. His presence filled the room with an uneasy feeling, making Emma's heart pound. Soon after, he stepped closer, and Emma backed away, her foot catching on the edge of a table. She nearly stumbled as his cold gaze bore into her, his small smile making her feel trapped. Everything about his movements and the way he watched her sent chills down her spine. It was clear to Emma now that Mr. Harrington was part of the secret she had been uncovering, and whatever he knew, it was something dangerous. That moment, Emma sprinted through the dark hallways of the school, her heart pounding in her chest. Behind her, the steady, heavy footsteps of Mr. Harrington echoed, each step deliberate, like a predator confident its prey couldn't escape. The halls felt endless, but Emma pushed herself to keep going, her only focus on reaching the exit. Just as she got close, a strong hand grabbed her arm, pulling her back. She screamed and struggled, but the grip was unrelenting, holding her firmly in place. Mr. Harrington's expression was a mix of anger and desperation, his eyes glaring with a strange intensity. He looked at her as if she was the answer to something that had haunted him for years. Emma felt a chill run through her as he stared at her, with a combination of hatred and sadness. His eyes seemed to hold secrets too big to understand, and for a moment, she froze, unsure of what would happen next. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from the far end of the hallway, breaking the tension. The noise was sharp and quick, signaling that someone or something was approaching. Emma's fear deepened, unsure of what this new presence could mean. Suddenly, a young teacher stepped out of the shadows, drawn by Emma's scream. Her face turned pale when she saw Emma trapped in Mr. Harrington's grip. "Let her go," the teacher shouted. For a moment, Mr. Harrington hesitated, but then he slowly released Emma. "You don't understand anything," he muttered, almost as if talking to himself. The teacher quickly pulled Emma away, keeping her safe, while Mr. Harrington stood still, his head bowed as if he had given up. When the police arrived, they placed handcuffs on Mr. Harrington. But even as they led him away, he remained calm. His voice was soft but chilling as he spoke. "You'll regret this. I was the only one who could stop it. You think I'm the monster, but I'm only paying the price that must be paid." At that moment, Emma, still trembling, listened to his words, her mind filled with confusion. But what stayed with her the most was the look in Mr. Harrington's eyes before he left. It wasn't just anger, cause it was a warning. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. The words of Mr. Harrington kept echoing in her mind, filling her with unease. His mention of paying the price that must be paid wouldn't leave her thoughts. The connection to her family felt like a puzzle she couldn't solve, and it only made her more uneasy. Desperate for answers, Emma opened Laura's diary again. As she flipped to the familiar page, new writing appeared, clearer than ever before. The message seemed to leap off the page saying, "You know the answer, Emma. Look to the past. It all began with blood." Emma felt a shiver run through her. She realized she didn't know much about her mother's side of the family. But now she was certain that there was a hidden truth buried deep in the past, which something darker than she had imagined. Closing the diary, Emma made a silent vow. No matter how frightening the truth might be, she was determined to uncover it. She couldn't ignore the mystery any longer. At night, Emma sat at her desk, staring at Laura's diary lying in front of her. The soft yellow light of her room flickered slightly, and the air felt heavy. Emma knew this diary wasn't just Laura's, and it held secrets far bigger than she could imagine. Secrets that somehow connected her, Laura, and Mr. Harrington. She turned to the last page of the diary. There were no new words this time, but a small crease in the corner of the page caught her attention. Hesitantly, she tore it open and discovered a tiny photo hidden inside. The picture showed Laura standing with her family in front of an old house that looked strangely familiar. Emma flipped the photo over. On the back, there was a faintly printed address, and it's a house in a part of town she hadn't visited in years. The next day, Emma went to the address. The old house looked abandoned, with its windows tightly shut and the paint peeling off its walls. As she stepped onto the front porch, a strange memory flickered in her mind, and its faint images of faces she couldn't quite place, and the sound of laughter from her childhood. The front door was locked, but Emma noticed a window slightly open on the side of the house. Carefully, she climbed through and found herself in a dusty living room. The air smelled old, and the walls were lined with faded family photos. The pictures showed Laura with her parents, smiling and happy. But there were other faces in the photos too, people Emma didn't recognize, yet somehow felt a deep connection to. Something about this place seemed tied to her past, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was meant to be there. As Emma explored the house further, she came across a small room tucked in the corner. Inside, on an old wooden table, lay a stack of dusty documents. Curious, she began to sift through them. One document immediately caught her eye, and it was Laura's birth certificate. Beneath Laura's mother's name, Emma read Margaret Winslow, née Carter. Emma's heart raced. Her own mother's last name was Carter. Quickly, she flipped through the other papers, desperate to find more connections. What she discovered only deepened her shock, and those are personal letters, old postcards, and a death certificate from 12 years ago. The certificate named Laura's father, Robert Winslow. The letter explained how Robert had died in a car accident he caused himself after hitting a young girl crossing the street. The name of the girl is Sarah Harrington. Emma's head spun as everything began to fall into place. Mr. Harrington's anger wasn't just about Laura. He blamed her entire family for the death of his daughter. The pieces fit together, revealing a terrible truth. Emma realized she had uncovered a tragedy that had connected all their lives in ways she never imagined. The story ended, but the weight of the secrets would stay with Emma forever.